Welcome to Honcho on the Air, a podcast that brings you the latest talks and the latest trends in business, technology, innovation, and the candid side of C-level executives. Each week on this season, we explore topics and issues on post-pandemic digital transformation, recovery plan, digital economy, transformational technologies, data analytics, and AI, and of course, many more.
Honcho on the Air second season is sponsored by Tier 1 Entertainment. Truly top tier. Like what you hear so far. Make sure you never miss the show by clicking the follow button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So, with our guest today is Michael Blakey. He's the managing partner and co-founder of Singapore-based venture capital firm Cocoon Capital. Set up alongside Will Klipgen in 2016, Cocoon adopts a hands-on, founder-first approach to early-stage investing. With its slogan, Dare to Change, it differentiates itself by working closely with its portfolio founders to unleash their potential to change the world. He is going to share with us how managing a business is changing in times of the pandemic. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, I was only able to share a very brief summary about you. So just in case that I missed some things, and if you want to introduce what Cocoon Capital is about, you may do so. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me on here. I'm really looking forward to the next 20 minutes or so and answering all the questions that you have for me, hopefully in a way that the audience will be able to take away something useful from it. So, and thanks very much for the kind of intro. Just a bit more of my background. I've been an early stage investor for the last 21 years. I moved out to Asia in 2013. And at Cocoon, the approach we take is slightly different. As well as being hands-on, we only do about 5 investments a year. We focus on deep tech and enterprise tech. You probably heard the first money in is normally from friends, family, and fools. So I think we're put into the fools category. We like going in really, really early. We're investing in people primarily, more than anything else. And then we help our portfolio companies post-investment achieve the vision that they started off with.
Thank you so much for that one. And how does Cocoon Capital work? Can you give the viewers an overview on how does the process for it, of course, in terms of investment, and how do you partner with your portfolio?
So, Cocoon is a VC fund. So we're a 30 million Singapore dollar fund. We invest into startups across the region. As I said earlier, just into the very early stage companies. When we invest, on average, we invest about $750,000 and then take a stake in the business. And then in terms of the support that we give to founders post-investment, is a lot of founders are first-time founders. So a lot of them have never built a business before. They're amazingly smart people. They know a huge amount about their product, but in terms of actually building and scaling a business, it's probably the first time that they're going through this process, and it can be quite daunting. So at Cocoon, both myself and Will are ex-founders. So Will himself actually built a company from scratch, which then became a pan-European company, which he sold to Yahoo for $650 million. And he comes from very much from a tech background. So he's seen and been able to scale companies across both a region and also the globe. So he was also the original investor into companies like Property Guru. So we take a lot of the learnings that we've been, because we've both been doing this for 20 years plus. So we've taken those learnings and we share these with the founders. So we run things like a Cocoon Academy, which is like a mini MBA program for the founders, which helps them to understand a bit about fundraising. It helps them in terms of how to run a board, how to scale teams, how to build a culture, how to build brands from scratch. All of these types of things, as well as a lot on the tech side as well. Because what we believe we're doing is we're investing in smart people, and we're trying then to help educate them and support them to actually build either regional or global businesses.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much for that information. Actually, Michael, based from what you mentioned earlier, I understand that it's not only you don't only advocate for, of course, helping founders with in terms of like investments and of course
Mm.
ventures, but there's also well, in a way, a knowledge transfer on how they would be able to better the companies that they do have with, of course, the help from you guys and your knowledge within the industry already. But of course, given that you started Cocoon Capital in 2016, coming into 5 years. Unfortunately, we hit the pandemic a few years ago. How is it with in terms of like overseeing the business? What's the differences that you would have had observed pre-pandemic and of course during the pandemic? And of course, how did you manage those challenges?
I think that there's two answers I'll give there. I'll give it as how Cocoon has managed it, and also talk a little bit about how some of our founders have managed it as well. So at Cocoon, obviously, one of the probably the biggest issue that we have faced over the last couple of years is the inability to travel. We're not the companies that we're investing in quite often are pre-revenue and sometimes pre-product. So when I say we're investing in people, that is 90% of our decision making, and not being able to meet the founders face to face, and getting to know them not just kind of in the boardroom, but on a personal level as well, is makes our decision that much harder, especially as we're talking about a large sum of money. And I think it's slightly different for later stage funds because there's normally data that, they've normally got sales, they've normally got data so they can actually talk to customers, they can actually get an understanding of the business. When you're literally just investing in a piece of paper and the people, you really got to focus on the people. And, even now where, you're in the Philippines, I'm in Singapore, we have a conversation, but we don't really get to know each other personally. It's not like, oh, we're going to have a coffee and I learn a bit more about you personally and the such. So for me, that was a real struggle, I've got to say, to actually overcome. And especially when there's always reasons why you shouldn't invest in a company. So I must admit that I became a little bit trigger shy. Because if you know the person, you've got to know them really well, then you kind of like, okay, we understand there's this problem, but fundamentally we know the person and we believe that they can overcome this. If your understanding of that person becomes less, if something comes along which you see as a big problem, it can affect it. It's easier to sway yourself not to take that kind of leap of faith in terms of making the investment. So, what we've had to do is we have a lot more Zoom calls. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. So, even this year, we've invested in founders in Indonesia, in Vietnam that we've not met last year, and also in the Philippines last year. So we just have to have more meetings. We have to have more calls. Sometimes it's a bit generic. The process has extended, which is kind of sometimes more frustrating for the founders, but sometimes it's the only way. Normally for me, if I met a founder in Manila that I really liked, I would go there and I would spend 4 or 5 days. I would talk to them every day. I would go into their office. If they had an office, I would talk to their employees. I would see how they would work, and it will give me an understanding of how we work and how we would work as a partnership. Because when we invest into companies, it's very much a partnership. I think for founders, I think the biggest impact it's had on them is, I think, of the mental health. It's for a lot of, building your own company from scratch is hugely stressful. Things never go according to plan, and you've got to accept that. But you fight tooth and nail for every kind of milestone that you hit. And for a lot of companies, that have got, they've built that traction, and all of a sudden, literally overnight, they lose 100% of their revenue, or their whole business model has suddenly had to change because, I don't think anybody in the worst case scenario would have thought that countries would basically go in lockdown and you could not travel. Let not just travel, regionally, but just travel within your own city. So that's affected, a lot of our founders. So, how we work with them, we have to be very understanding. We have to give them additional support, help them through. I mean, I guess luckily or unluckily, Will and I have been through a couple of downturns. We've been through the financial crisis. We've also gone through the dot-com bust. So there's a lot of learnings that we've taken from those experiences to, how to actually be able to pivot your business, how to actually manage the stress of having to let people go, when is the right decision, how to communicate with your team, because it affects the founders, but also affects the morale of the employees as well. And you've got to keep them motivated as they're going through lots of stresses as well. So I think that the biggest thing for a lot of our founders to have to overcome is these sudden changes and trying to still stay positive when kind of the world is kind of burning around them, and they're having to literally in some instances start all over again from scratch.
Right. Well, I do agree with the two main key points that you mentioned. Of course, it's really important to have a personal connection with the potential investments that you would have, and it's very important, especially when talking about money, right? And of course, funding, and of course, the second one would be talking about mental health. It's really important to have everyone stay afloat, and of course, during the times of the pandemic, going through these challenges, make sure that the morale is intact. And of course, that there's peace of mind, especially with the founders, knowing that they're not wasting their time or they're really going somewhere. And with your help, of course, that's been giving them direction as well. So that's quite interesting for what Cocoon Capital has been doing for the past year. So not only during this pandemic now, of course, but during the pre-pandemic years as well. So I'm sure that our viewers would be very interested to know what attributes, or of course, what's your criteria, and of course, choosing a potential partner, especially in terms of providing funding to the founders.
I think when we're looking at founding teams, so it could be an individual, but if you talk to any investor, they always say they prefer founding teams than an individual. And part of it is because of the huge amount of stress it is to run a business. And, I look at my business partner, Will Clint, and myself, and a lot of other successful businesses out there. You've got to believe in the opposites attract. So your co-founder can't have the same strength and weaknesses as you do. So the whole point of when you're finding, and I think actually finding your co-founder is probably the hardest thing that a founder has to do. A lot of people think, it's getting the traction or it's coming up with the idea. I always tell people, I said, start off by finding the best co-founder. When I met Will, I was not looking at setting up a fund. I was happy doing my own business. But when you find the right person, that this is somebody that I can work with. He covers all of my numerous weaknesses. I was like, I've got to figure out what I can then do with him that will be successful, because I know teaming up with him. So when I'm talking to founders and founding teams, I'm like, okay, you're very strong on this, you're very strong on that. There's no glaring weaknesses in this team, and there's a huge amount of respect between the founders. So it's fine to be opposite. But, and it's fine to argue. I mean, my team say that Will and I argue like a married couple all the time. But, I think we debate quite heavily with each other. We're very opinionated. But I massively respect Will and everything that he's achieved and his opinion. I might have a different one, and I think he agrees with it. So we always try to come to that middle ground. And if we can ever agree on, like, let's say, doing an investment, then we know that we've kind of looked at it all from all different angles. So we're looking for teams that have a very strong bond. They don't have to be have known each other for, 10, 15 years. You can really tell in a meeting if there is a close bond between the founders and that they know the space that they're in. we also look for founders that have overcome failure. Being an entrepreneur is an incredibly difficult journey, and things will always go wrong. I don't know, even if I look at all of my successful companies, they've all gone through kind of some nail-biting times at one point in time or the other. And they've all kind of tried things which have failed. Not necessarily the entire business, but they've experimented, they've pushed the boundaries, and you can't be frightened of failure. So when I talk to the founders, I always ask them, what have you tried which you haven't achieved? And then I'm more looking at terms of what have you learned from that experience? What have you taken away from that experience that will, if a founder has had a failed business before, I actually kind of love it because it's somebody's paid for their MBA in building businesses. So my first question always is what have you taken away from that experience, which is going to improve the chance of success on this one? And then I think that the final thing, there is a very thin line between confidence and arrogance. I want to invest in confident people. I've got to invest in confident people because, as I just said, there's a lot of failure. So you don't want people to run away as soon as things don't go according to plan. But they really have to have a belief in what they're doing. The difference between confidence and arrogance is confidence is this is what I'm going to do no matter what. But they will always listen to other people's opinion. And if they realize they've made a bad decision, they're confident enough to actually change it or adapt it or bring in the right person they need to, or whatever it actually is. An arrogant person will just go straight from A to B, will not listen to anybody who thinks they know everything, and also won't look at the feedback they're getting from either their customers or their employees about what they should be doing. So they just make the same mistake over and over and over again.
Right. And yeah, I get you clearly. And I love how you're saying that you're not looking for someone who's perfect, but rather for someone who has potential and who wouldn't really be affected by the challenges, or would rather learn to, when you hit rock bottom, there's no way to go but up. And I think I love it that it's something that you really impart with your partners. And yeah, I guess it's really something fruitful as well for hearing from, of course, venture capitalists and to hear those words of affirmation as well. But there
is one thing I would like to add, though, and this is not something that people really talk about that often, but it's really important. And it's important as well for the founder to think of it this way. You have to like the person on the other side of the table. Mm-hmm. This is a beginning of hopefully a long relationship. When we're investing into companies at the stage we're at, quite often it's going to be 8 or 9 years before we kind of be able to sell the company, or kind of, if you don't like, it's not this, and this is not about trust. Obviously, you would never invest in anybody we didn't trust, but you've got to actually like that person. You're going to have to talk to them relatively often. You can't invest in people that you just like. I just don't like. I don't want to have to deal with you every month. I don't want to have these conversations. And I think it is, and that's a very difficult thing because that's not anything you can really control. Right. You walk into the room and the person just, for whatever reason, says, I don't like you. There's not much you can do about it, but it is something that does affect an investment decision. And it also should be something that founders are thinking of when they actually meet investors, is do I like this person? Do I want to have to deal with them on a regular basis? Because also, if you dislike them, that there's normally some underlying reason or level of distrust that there is. And that's where, you don't want to start off a relationship when you don't trust the other party within the relationship, because it's going to get messy somewhere down the line. Right.
Relationship really is really the foundation of something that, of course, for something good, right? Yeah. So, Michael, we do have some viewers who might be founders or potential entrepreneurs as well. So they're probably thinking of starting their own businesses as well. I'm not sure if you do have a forecast of what industries or what types of businesses or would be, of course, have a potential to grow despite going through the pandemic?
I think the obvious ones that are talked about a lot are obviously there's huge opportunities within fintech.
Right.
I think for edtech, I personally love like logistics. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. As I said, I do more deep tech and enterprise tech. E-commerce, there's still, if we look at if you look at Southeast Asia as a region, there's still so many verticals that don't have a dominant player. If I was in Europe or the US, pretty much every vertical that you can think of, there is already somebody who has dominance within any specific vertical. But in Southeast Asia, there is this massive opportunity. So I think, obviously kind of cryptocurrencies. I mean, recently, the last month, the whole metaverse is something that there's been a huge amount of interest in. And I do think I'm not a particular fan of it, but then there's a lot of things out there I'm not a particular fan of, but I do realize that it is coming. There's no point me sitting on the beach trying to tell the tide not to come in. It's going to happen if I like it or not. So we have to actually look at, all of these things. But as a fund, we don't sit and say, these are the verticals we're going to look for. As I say, we're always looking for people. If we can find the right team, I'd much prefer to invest in in a great team with a bad idea than a great idea with a bad team. Because my view is that the great team will figure out they've got a bad idea and they'll figure out how to make it a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of so if you look at our portfolio, it's pretty diverse. And there's things in there which I never, ever thought that I would be investing in. But, I met founders that persuaded me that I needed to take these jumps in these different verticals. And to be quite honest, I'm very happy I did.
Honcho on the Air second season is sponsored by Globe Labs. Redefine possibilities. Like what you hear so far, make sure you never miss the show by clicking the follow button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
That's nice. That's nice. Well, speaking of, since we're on the topic of the criteria as well, and we're not really specific with the industries, rather than focusing on, of course, the people and the potential partners that you would have. Let's say that, well, I'm also curious myself, of course, what items or what criteria should founders or business partners or entrepreneurs need to look out when, of course, building a potential business?
I think one of the mistakes that I look at quite often, and this is not just about sometimes picking the right founder, it's also being honest with you. Is like quite often I see founders and they've done a 50-50 split of the business, but there's normally one founder who's much better than the other. And they kind of sit there and say, well, this is what we've agreed. They're a friend of mine, so, and it normally is absolutely fine at the beginning. The problem normally happens like 3-4 years down the line where the company is huge and one person is the CEO and the other person is kind of left the business because the business has outgrown them. And they're all like, well, we've got the same equity stake, but I'm doing, so that there's decisions that you can make at the beginning that I think can damage the long-term kind of potential of the business. And I think also what you've got to look at is very rarely will you be right first time. So, obviously when people pitch to me, they always pitch to me the perfect plan. This is what we're going to do. We're going to hit product market fit the first time. We put a product out there and we know exactly how much we can charge our customers. What you've got to be able to do is when you're launching, when you're building a business, understand that there's a continual feedback loop, that you've always got to be testing. You've got to be pushing boundaries. There is no I was told my grandfather was an entrepreneur as well. And he was like, Michael, if anybody tells you they've never had a failure, then they've never taken any risks. What you've always got to be able to do is as an entrepreneur, you're always pushing the boundaries, and you're pushing them until they break, and we're always learning. I never have any issues with my founders making mistakes. As I always say, as long as you don't make the same mistake twice. Mm-hmm. So, and when you make that mistake, what is your learning? How are you then going to take the learnings from that and actually improve your next iteration of whatever you're doing? And I think that's the really important thing. And it's also then managing the communication with the other parties within the business, with your investors. If you've got investors, is quite often you see is that they'll take, founders will take money from investors, and then they'll say, we've got your money, we don't need to talk to you anymore.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, like a year later, they're like, oh my God, we need more money. Well, we'll go back to the investors, and the investors, well, like, you haven't talked, we don't know what's going on. Literally, we haven't heard from you for 12 months, and you suddenly come to us saying you need more money. Mm-hmm. Things haven't gone according to plan. Probably not for us. But what you find is that if you keep your investors up to date, and this is like the same with your team, if the team knows that things aren't going according to plan, but they know that you're learning and that you're improving and they feel part of the journey, when you go to an investor and they've been tracking you and they've been kept up to date and say, look, we need more money. We figured out that idea A, B, and C sucked, but actually D is now getting traction because we've taken all of these learnings and it's improved. And you've got a much greater chance of actually successfully raising funding. So I think communication with the interested parties, be the employees, in terms of kind of being honest with yourself, and the key team at the beginning. And I think always pushing boundaries, always trying new things, never taking the easy route, sometimes just experimenting to see if there's better ways of doing it, and be willing to pull the plug when it's not working, or double down when you actually see the traction, even if it's not quite according to plan. And I think the last 2 points is all about focus. So it's very easy for companies to start off saying, I'm going to do this one thing. And then all of a sudden, all these other opportunities start happening, but it's not part of the core business, but you start chasing revenue or start chasing opportunities. And the problem is you then become very unfocused. And, it's like, do one thing well before looking to do your next thing. If you spread yourself too thin, the likelihood of failure massively increases. And if you look at all the great businesses out there, that the Googles, the Amazons, all of these they all started doing one thing really well. They got total dominance, they became experts. And then everything else they've done now, they're doing drones, they're doing warehousing, they're doing everything, is all that was all started after they had that core business, and they then expanded, but they always had that kind of that driver. And I think that is like a really critical piece to look at. And then the last piece is about the people. It's about finding the team. Like every founder I talk to is like, Michael, there's a talent shortage. We can't find the people. Mm-hmm. But what's amazing is the great founders always find good people. And kind of when you talk about leadership, it's part of it is actually, can you sell your vision, not just to investors, but to employees? Can you inspire people to actually come and join your journey from probably a lot less money that they're already earning? And, but the good founders can do that. They can persuade people that to join their kind of believe in their vision and take that plunge and take that risk to actually be able to do that. And I think that's like a kind of like critical thing. So quite often if I'm looking at a company to invest in, they've already got employees, I will go and look and I'll talk to the employees just to see the quality of the people. And quite often, I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, you're like, how did you get this person? He is just, he's got 10 years of this and I'm just like, if you can persuade somebody like that to join you, then, and they know the business better than me, then this is a company I should be looking to invest in. It's a real tick in the box. And it also shows that you have the ability to grow. I always like saying I'm the dumbest person in the company. Like, I look at all the team I've got around me and I think they're all much smarter than me. I'm just good with people. I'm good at persuading people and setting that vision. They're all much smarter. They're able to do stuff that I could never dream about doing. I think that's a really important thing as a founder. Don't be fearful of actually hiring or getting people who are better than you into the company.
Right. I agree with everything that you've said just now, actually. Yeah. I'm sure that it has been a very informative episode, especially for viewers. And for me personally, it's been a fruitful discussion with you, Michael. But unfortunately, we don't have the liberty of time to, of course, discuss additional information. So although it has been a very informative discussion already, my personal takeaway actually would be coming from you and everything that you've said just now, that mistakes are okay. What's important is, of course, to continue to move forward and push the boundaries. But of course, I would be ending the floor with a parting message from you, and just in case that you wanted to share additional information, and of course, how can of course potential entrepreneurs contact Cocoon Capital as well?
Yeah, so for me, if you're looking to raise funding, seed funding, we're always on the lookout. Please go to our website at www.cocooncap.com. I'm sure the details will be below in the description, and you can apply online. We look for every company and we reply to everybody that reaches out to us. The kind of piece of advice that I will give you is every cloud has a silver lining. So whilst, COVID and the restrictions and the devastation that it has caused has obviously impacted negatively a lot of lives, there's also a lot of new opportunities out there that weren't there before. So, don't get disheartened. Always look, there is so much opportunity, and technology is the great leveler. Technology, you don't need to have degrees. You don't need to have traveled the world. Technology makes the world a smaller place, and you can now build a global business just for like $20,000 to $30,000. Even if that, you could probably even say $200 or $300 nowadays. So, this is the time when the world is becoming your oyster. And, as I always say, dare to change.
Thank you so much for that one, Michael. And of course, the viewers, thank you so much for joining us this episode. Again, our guest for this episode is Michael Blakey, managing partner and co-founder of Singapore-based venture capital firm Cocoon Capital. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Honcho on the Air. Make sure to visit our website, aseanhr.org, and to subscribe to us in Spotify so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, also like and subscribe to our social media pages to get the latest news and updates. Thank you so much, and see you on the next episode.